So AWS CloudFront delivers content fast by caching it at edge locations around the world. But how does CloudFront know whether to serve a cached response or fetch fresh content from the origin? Well, the answer lies in its cache key, or a cache key. And what a cache key is it's a unique identifier that CloudFront uses to determine whether a cached response exists for a given request. So if the request cache key matches something already stored at the edge location, then CloudFront serves the cache content, which is known as a cache hit. And if not, it forwards the request to the origin and then stores the response under a new cache key. And this would be a cache miss. And so here's a little diagram here. Say you have the client somewhere in the world. They access Amazon CloudFront. A cache hit means that the content returned is cached content, whereas a cache miss will be fetch it from the origin. And then after that, you would cache the new content in the edge location, and then this cache content would then be returned to the client. And so how does this cache key actually get formed? So there's a default cache key, which consists of the host name, the resource path. So for example, say you have a request to cdn.example.com-home. That would have the same cache key as a request to -home, even if you change query parameters like this. So say you have language French versus English. And this is because the default cache key includes host name and resource path. So host name being cdnexample.com, path being home, but it does not include query strings like this one right here, headers, and cookies by default. You can configure it to use those, but those is not the default behavior. And so this would mean that even though this content should be different, so say for example you want it served up in French, and here you wanted it served up in English, the default cache key would be the same, so the same content would be served up, which could lead to cache mismatches or stale content. So if your application varies content based on things like the user location, identity, device type, language, query parameters like we saw here, then you can customize your cache key, because essentially the default cache key won't be enough. So you'll need to enhance the cache key to reflect these differences. And so how do you actually customize the cache key? You do that with cache policies. So CloudFront lets you define cache policies to control what gets included in the cache key. So then you can customize it to include query strings or specific query strings, selected headers like maybe accept language, and then optional cookies. And here's just a simple example of doing it with Terraform. So you have AWS CloudFront cache policy resource, just give it a name. And then in here, in what is forwarded to the origin, which basically means your origin, so S3 bucket, whatever you're using. You have a headers configuration, so you can see the headers you set, and this would be a whitelist. You have cookies, so which cookies to include. Then you have query strings, so only include these ones. So we'd have page, so whatever's served up, the cache would be different based off the page query. And then you can just set some TTL for cache expiration. So if you're using Terraform, it's very easy. You can, of course, use the AWS console as well. All you have to do is just attach this policy to your CloudFront distribution. I want to thank you for liking and subscribing. Check out my courses and content in the description. Take it easy.